Some voices break the silence. Hers rebuilt it. She was the last name on the program, penciled in as an afterthought. Edna M. Carter, vocal solo. Most of the audience had already gathered their coats. A few children were half asleep in their chairs. The snack table had been picked clean, save for some broken cookies and lukewarm coffee. Then the curtain drew back. She stood there in soft-soled shoes, ankles thin as fence wire, cardigan buttoned up to her chin, beige blouse tucked neatly into a pleated skirt. Her white hair was combed back, parted with care. It's like she'd done it the same way for 60 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One boy whispered, "Is she lost?" A girl giggled, then hushed herself. Even the judge's 3 local business owners in folding chairs exchanged awkward glances. Edna didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, but didn't mind. She reached for the microphone, her hand trembling. Grasped it like one might hold a daffodil in wind. Her lips moved, just barely. "Good evening," she said, her voice catching on the first syllable. "Like to sing something for you." Someone in the back cleared their throat. A few clapped, politely then she sang. The first note rang out pure, unwavering, strange in its strength, like an old bell pulled from dust, suddenly ringing true in the room. Changed at first, no one breathed. The note hung there like a lantern. In fog, soft, golden, impossible to ignore. It wasn't loud, wasn't even technically perfect, but it carried something. Ow! A weight, a longing. The kind of sound that felt like it had waited decades to be heard. One of the judges sat back in his chair, his eyebrows rising slowly. A young woman in the second row lowered her phone and stared. In the back corner, a middle-aged man folded, his arms tightly, jaw clenched, as Edna moved into the first verse. Her voice grew steadier, stronger. The room, once a scatter of noise and expectation, settled into reverent silence. She sang of years gone by, of hands once held, now folded, of lights left on in empty kitchens, of walking forward even when no one's watching. Simple melody, old, maybe even forgotten. But her voice gave it new breath. By the chorus it was clear, this wasn't a performance, it was a confession. It was a prayer. It was home. She finished on a whisper, final note that quivered in the air, then vanished. No fireworks, no sudden cheer, just stillness, and then slowly applause. Gentle at first, then rising. Not frantic, not flashy, just honest. Hands clapping not for show, but in thanks. No one laughed. No one left. Something had happened. And everyone in that room knew it, though most wouldn't find the words until later. Some people don't disappear, they just live quietly enough to be forgotten. Edna May Carter lived in a house that had forgotten how to be loud. It sat at the corner of Sycamore and Willow in a quiet, Ohio town no one ever passed through only. Into or out of. The shutters needed paint. The mailbox leaned slightly right, like it was tired. But inside, everything was neat, tidy, lived in. She'd been in that house since 1962, moved in with her husband, Charles, after he came home from Korea. They bought it for $14,000 and paid it off in 18 years. The mortgage certificate still hung in the hallway, next to their wedding photo him in uniform, her in borrowed lace. They never had children. It wasn't for lack of trying. There was a cradle Charles built in the garage one spring. Pale oak. Smooth as satin. She kept it in the attic after the 3rd miscarriage. Some things you couldn't make sense of. Some wounds just learned to stay quiet. Charles died in 2003, the day after Halloween. He'd eaten too many of the mini Snickers she'd set aside for the kids. That night, his breathing got rough. By morning, she was alone. She stopped singing that week. For years, Edna's life shrank gently into habit. She rose each morning at 6, made tea in a chipped blue kettle, read devotionals in her father's old chair by the window. She visited the grocery store on Wednesdays always early, before the aisles got too noisy. The cashier, Maria, would ask how she was, and Edna always answered, still standing. She played records on Sundays. Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, hymns mostly. But only when the house was very still. Sometimes she'd hum along, just barely. She never sang aloud. She attended church, but sat in the back. Brought deviled eggs to the socials. Was always the first to help fold chairs after events, and the last two leave quietly slipping out with a gentle nod. Her world had become smaller, not in bitterness, just smaller. Like a candle burned down, still giving off warmth, but content with flickering in a corner. Her friends began to pass, first Dolores, then Margaret. A thinning circle. Sunday afternoons got quieter. No more bridge, no more gossip. Just books, old photos. Long walks, slow and deliberate. And yet, even in that silence, there was music. Not in the form of concerts or stages, but in the way she made coffee. The way her slippers patted against the linoleum floor. The way she wrapped gifts in newspaper, with little bows tied just so. Music had once been her dream. She'd sung as a girl in the Methodist choir, led harmonies in high school. In 1954, she'd won the Stark County Youth Vocal Competition. The prize was a trip to Cleveland. Her mother had cried. Her father said, "Don't let the world change your heart." But life moved on. Charles needed work. She took a job at the post office, sang on weekends. Just enough to remember she still could. Then not at all. By the time she turned 80, the only audience she had was a yellow canary named Louis, who chirped at her from the kitchen window. And even he stopped singing come winter until one Tuesday afternoon when Edna made a mistake. She sang out loud in the kitchen while doing dishes, and someone heard her. She buried her voice the way others bury hope, gently, and with both hands. It was a small auditorium in Canton. Summer of 1987, humid, full of promise. Edna had ironed her best skirt the night before and packed a thermos of honeyed tea. For her throat, the Stark County State Talent auditions. Nothing big, but just big enough to stir something in her again. She was 42. Most contestants were younger girls with teased bangs and sequin blouses, boys who danced like they were trying not to fall. Edna had chosen a gospel hymn. No frills. Just her voice, a piano, and a hope so quiet it almost didn't dare speak. Backstage, Charles stood beside her, hands in pockets. He kissed her cheek and said, "You'll do great, but Edie, don't let it get to you if they're looking for something shinier." She'd smiled, but inside something folded. She sang with all the tenderness she had. The judges were polite. One leaned in. One scribbled something. One tapped her pen rhythmically on the table. Afterward, they thanked her, told her she had a pleasant tone, and wished her the best of luck. She didn't place. Didn't even get a mention that night. Back in the car, she said nothing. Charles offered to stop for pie, but she declined. She stared out the window at the passing cornfields and let her silence thicken. When they got home, she hung up her dress carefully, pressed the creases smooth, then placed her sheet music in the bottom drawer of her cedar chest. It stayed there for nearly 40 years. She told herself it hadn't mattered. That singing was something she'd done, not something she was. Part of her had closed that night, not bitterly, not angrily, just quietly, like someone dimming the lights before leaving a room and locking the door behind them. The door she locked so long ago creaked open, not with a bang, but with kindness. It began on an ordinary Tuesday. Nancy Blevins was running late. The casserole was still warm, wrapped in foil and dish towels, resting on the passenger seat. Beside her purse, Edna had recently come home from minor knee surgery, and the church ladies had organized a meal rotation. Nancy, recently retired and newly divorced, found comfort in small duties. She'd always admired Edna, her poise, her quiet grace, but they hadn't been more than passing acquaintances. She knocked twice, let herself in, and called out gently, "Edna, it's just Nancy, hun. I'm leaving this in your kitchen." The house smelled like lemon cleaner and lavender powder. Sunlight pooled on the linoleum. And then she heard it. A voice, fragile but unmistakably pure, drifting from down the hallway. It was a hymn, something old, softly and tenderly. The kind of song not sung much anymore. Nancy stood still. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the sound rooted her. It wasn't just the clarity. It was the ache in it. Voice aged not by weakness, but by memory. She followed the sound to the kitchen. Edna stood by the sink, back turned, drying a mug, singing to no one, or perhaps to herself. When she finished, she turned, startled. "Oh, Nancy, I didn't hear you." "I'm sorry," Nancy said quickly. Edna, that was beautiful." Edna blushed, brushing her hands on her apron. "Oh, mercy, I haven't sung for anyone in years. Just habit, I suppose?" "No," Nancy said, stepping forward. "You have to sing again. There's a community showcase next month. It's small, but sweet. You should do it." Edna chuckled softly, almost dismissively. "Nancy, I'm nearly 80. My voice creaks like my knees." Nancy smiled. "Maybe, but tonight it creaked my heart wide open." She left the casserole on the counter and a flyer on the table. "Just think about it," she said before leaving. "You've still got something worth hearing." For the rest of that evening, Edna sat in her quiet living room, the flyer resting on her lap. She didn't move for a long time, and then, very softly, she hummed. The first step back is never loud. It's a whisper that says, maybe. The flyer sat on her kitchen table for 6 days, folded once, then unfolded, then folded again. She didn't throw it out. That mattered more than she let on each morning. Edna would make her tea, glance at the paper beside the salt shaker, and look away. But something had shifted. Something quiet and persistent, like a bird tapping at a window. On the 7th day, she picked up the phone. The woman who answered was cheerful and young, maybe 30. "Yes, ma'am. We still have a few open spots. It'll be our last act of the evening." "I'd prefer not to be introduced," Edna said softly. "Just let me walk on." "Of course," the girl replied, pausing. "You want a piano?" "Accompaniment, no," Edna said. "Just me." She hung up and sat very still. That afternoon, she went to the closet and pulled down an old cedar box. Inside was her sheet music, killowed at the edges. Ink faded. She chose a hymn, one her mother used to hum while slicing apples, when she hadn't sung aloud since Charles passed. She didn't tell anyone, not Nancy, not even the pastor who might have insisted on coming. Some things needed to be hers alone. The day before the performance, she did her hair for the first time in months, brushed it back into its familiar wave, dusted rouge on her cheeks, chose a soft blue blouse and a gray skirt, both neatly pressed. That evening, she stood in the mirror and stared at herself, lines around her mouth, a softness in her shoulders, face full of stories no one had heard in years. She didn't see a star. She saw a woman with a voice, and for the first time in 4 decades, she decided to use it. It wasn't a performance. It was a remembering. The community center buzzed like a Sunday picnic. Folding chairs filled the hall. Children squirmed in their seats. Parents waved to neighbors, and a row of teenagers passed a bag of butterscotch. Candies like contraband. It was talent night, nothing grand. Just local faces doing what they loved. A boy tapped, danced, and scuffed shoes. A teenage girl recited a poem about her cat. The retired fire chief played harmonica, hitting more wrong notes than right, but no one seemed to mind. Then, the MC returned to the mic. "We've got one last performer for the evening," she said. "Please welcome Edna Carter." A few claps. One person whispered, "Who?" and then dashed stillness. From the left side of the stage, Edna appeared. She walked carefully, each step measured. Her cardigan hugged her thin frame, and the soft blue blouse she wore caught the light just so. Her hands trembled as she reached the center. No music played, no introduction. Just her, standing alone beneath the yellow stage lights. She nodded once to the audience, then looked down and sang her voice. Frail at first, like tissue paper caught in wind. Then it settled, strengthened, like it remembered itself. The first note stretched long and low, cradled in breath. She sang an old hymn in the garden. The words fell gently into the room, like rain on a tin roof. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses. The crowd, once fidgeting and restless, fell still. Even the teenagers stopped whispering. Parents leaned forward. The old couple in the front row clasped hands. It wasn't showy, it wasn't loud, but it was honest. Every note held memory. The tremble in her voice wasn't weakness, it was history. Every breath a decade lived, every lyric a hand held. Prayer whispered, a loss grieved. A woman in the second row, Helen, recently widowed, felt tears slip down her cheek. Not sobs. Just quiet, grateful tears, like her heart had been seen. By the final verse, Edna closed her eyes, and he walks with me, and he talks with me. Her voice caught slightly, but she didn't stop. She finished the line, finished the song, then opened her eyes. No bows, no thank yous, just silence, and then applause. Long, unrushed, steady, not loud but full. Nancy stood at the back, hands clasped at her chest, tears streaming without shame. The man running sound big, burly, with a Marine Corps hat, turned away so no one saw him wipe his face. Edna smiled once, a small smile. Ah, the kind you give when something inside has settled into place. She turned, walked off stage. Behind her, the crowd kept clapping, long after the light dimmed. She didn't chase applause, but it followed her home. The next morning, Edna woke to sunlight and the scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. She moved slower than usual, her knees stiff, her shoulders a little sore. But something else moved inside her, something unburdened. She didn't expect anything to come of the night. A quiet performance. A moment passed, but just before noon, she found the first letter. It had been slipped through her mail slot. No return address, just her name in careful cursive. Inside, a simple note card, pale pink with a scalloped edge.
Die.
The handwriting wavered, as if written by someone whose fingers ached. Dear Miss Edna, I lost my husband 5 months ago. I haven't cried since the funeral. Last night I did. Thank you, Ellen T. She read it twice. Pressed the card to her chest, then placed it in a drawer next to the tea towels. 2 days later, another letter came. This one from a man named Harold Pierce. He was 76, widowed, a Korean war vet with 3 sons and a basement full of model trains. My wife sang that song every spring when she gardened. Hearing it again, hearing you sing, it felt like seeing her hands in the dirt again, coaxing tulips from mud. You gave her back to me, if only for a moment. More letters followed. A mother whose daughter hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. Young man struggling with depression who wrote, "You made the ache feel like a prayer." A former choir director from 2 towns over who mailed her a page of sheet music saying, "You reminded me why I loved this." Them neatly in an old recipe tin once filled with molasses cookies. Nancy came by with fresh bread and eyes still shining. "You were magnificent," she said. "You didn't just sing, you healed." Edna only smiled. "I just sang what I needed to hear." The library asked if she'd perform at their annual storytelling night. A retirement home called about a monthly sing-along. Church youth group invited her to speak. She declined most offers. Kindly, she wasn't chasing stages. She was answering something quieter. In the still hours of evening, she sat by the window with Louis the canary chirping beside her, and she read the letters again. Not out of pride, but gratitude. Each note, each thank you, each you, reminded me they didn't add to her. They reflected her back to herself. She hadn't set out to redeem anything, but somehow redemption had found her. She didn't build a platform. She pulled up chairs. It started with 4 people in the church basement. The room smelled of lemon oil and old hymnals. A circle of folding chairs. A piano pushed against the wall. Kettle on the table, steaming. Softly beside a plate of oatmeal cookies, Edna called it song and memory. Not a class. Not a concert. Just a gathering. No one had to sing. But they could, Marjorie, who'd buried her son in 1993, brought a dusty guitar. She strummed once, shyly. Then again, by the third week she was playing full hymns. Walter, a former steelworker, came every Thursday just to listen. He hadn't said more than 10 words in years, but he closed his eyes when Edna sang Abide With Me. One afternoon, a girl of 19 arrived, arms folded tight across her chest. Her name was Anna. She sat in the corner, earbuds in, eyes. On the floor, Edna didn't push. She offered tea, smile. A song by week 4, Anna took out one earbud. By week 6, she hummed along. By week 10, she sang harmony. Word spread not through posters or announcements, but through casseroles, whispered invitations. And the quiet magic of those who'd been moved, they met every Thursday at 2 p.m. Widower brought his grandson. A retired nurse brought her sister, who hadn't spoken since her stroke. One day she tapped the rhythm of Amazing Grace against the arm of her chair. No one missed it. Edna never called herself a teacher. She just said, "Let's begin with something simple." Sometimes they sang. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they just sat with each other. In a room where no one had to pretend they weren't hurting, she never once raised her voice. But people leaned in closer. Nancy started bringing soup. Marjorie wrote a song for her daughter's wedding. Walter clapped along to a lullaby his mother used to sing. Anna brought in a poem. Trembling as she read it aloud, Edna never missed a meeting. Even when her joints ached, even when the snow piled high. And always at the end she sang one last song, low and slow, like a blessing. No one applauded. They didn't have to. They left lighter, and somehow more whole. Not every finale needs a curtain. Some just need a quiet sky. It was late spring when Nancy suggested it. "Just one more gathering," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "Not for the papers, not for any stage. Just us, just the people you've touched." Edna smiled, her hands folded gently in her lap. "You make it sound like I'm leaving?" Nancy looked at her, eyes full of something unsaid. "You're not. But seasons change." And so one Sunday evening in May, they gathered behind Dot's diner. It wasn't advertised. No posters, no sign. Just word of mouth and a few handwritten notes slipped into mailboxes and church pews. The backyard was set with picnic tables and folding chairs. A string of soft yellow lights hanging between trees. Someone brought quilts. Someone else brought lemonade in mason jars. Walter tuned his harmonica. Anna arrived with her hair freshly brushed and her poem folded in a front pocket. Marjorie wore her Sunday best and brought the guitar her son once played. Edna sat on a wooden stool near the lilac bushes. She wore a soft gray dress with white trim and a silver brooch shaped like a sparrow. Her eyes were tired but peaceful. She waited for the birds to quiet, and then she sang no microphone, no piano, just the night air and the hush of memory. When "Peace like a river attendeth my way," her voice wasn't strong, not anymore, but it was steady. And true, around her, people sat with their hands folded, their hearts open. Some closed their eyes. Some looked to the sky. Some wept quietly, without embarrassment. She sang only one verse, then a chorus, then stopped. She didn't say goodbye, didn't make a speech, just nodded. A simple knowing nod, the kind that says that's enough. The air held her last note long after it was gone. People stayed, talked, hugged, shared casseroles and stories, and laughter under the soft hum of string lights. No one asked for an encore. No one needed one. Later that night, as chairs were stacked and blankets folded, Nancy stood alone for a moment. Hands tucked in her sweater pockets, watching Edna walk slowly toward her car. And in the quiet between them, she whispered, "You gave us back something we forgot we'd lost." Edna didn't turn, just smiled and kept walking. Some stories aren't told with volume, remembered in stillness. Edna Mae Carter passed on a mild October morning. No drama, no hospital lights, just the sound of wind tapping gently at her bedroom window. She was found in her favorite chair, a worn quilt across her lap, a record softly spinning in the corner. Billie Holiday's voice, low and golden, filled the room. There was no obituary in the paper. She'd asked for none. Let them remember what they felt, not what they read. She'd written in her will. At her memorial, a small service at the church basement, there were no eulogies. Just stories. Anna stood first, reading the same poem she had once tucked in her coat. Marjorie played her guitar, fingers trembling but sure. Walter, for the first time anyone could recall, sang one verse of how great thou art before quietly sitting down, hands shaking. No one spoke of fame or accolades. They spoke of soup shared during storms, of songs sung when words wouldn't come, of how Edna's voice had opened a door they hadn't realized was closed. Afterward, they served lemon bars and tea, Edna's favorite. The recipe was passed around on index cards, written in 3 different handwritings. Nancy placed a tiny sparrow brooch on the hymn book near Edna's chair, then turned out the light. No headlines followed, but in homes across the county, people hummed a little softer, prayed a little slower, called someone they hadn't spoken to in years. In the last page of Edna's journal, they found a single sentence. A quiet voice offered in love can still echo in the bones of the world. For those who had heard her, it did. If this story touched something quiet in you, maybe it's time to dust off an old dream. Maybe there's a voice yours or someone else's that still needs hearing. Share this with someone who's forgotten their song, because it's never too late to be heard. Not loudly, just truly.